Ori and the Will of the Wisps is one of the most beautiful and wondrous titles I played this year, full of incredible musical scores, set pieces, boss fights, and chase sequences that kept me playing until the very end and then immediately replaying again. The touching story does have a few cliches, but the execution of how these scenes transpire allow for profound moments of both joy and sadness. The gameplay offers a decent variety of challenges as the player is expected to perform precise jumps and use an array of abilities in quick succession or face death. All of this makes Ori and the Will of the Wisps an outstanding game, but then the preventable issues start to pile up, with the game suffering greatly due to technical problems such as frame rate issues being the most predominant. The story begins right after the Blind Forest. Ori, Gumo, and Naru are taking care of Kuro's egg, which hatches shortly after. Named Ku, she is welcomed and raised by Ori's family. Ku cannot fly due to a damaged wing, but thanks to her mother's feather is able to fly for the first time. Ku and Ori fly to Niwen where they crash. With the two now separated, Ori must travel through the forest in search of Ku, while also finding out that the forest has fallen to decay like Niwen once was. The story is full of emotionally charged moments as you head deeper into the land of Niwen. The story has some cliche elements as I stated before, but not to the extent that it becomes tiresome. The execution of these story elements is very well done. Like the Blind Forest, much of the story is told through actions and very little is spoken, so the characters' actions have to convey just as much as words, which they do. Best of all, there are more characters in this sequel to give Niwen more of life than Niwen, with creatures willing to help or just talk to Ori. The Spirit Tree and other guardians of Niwen do speak to provide context into the situation at hand, so you don't have to guess the motives for any of the characters of whether they want to help Ori or hurt Ori. It's a bit of a tearjerker, but the narrative is strong and complements the atmosphere that was set in the Blind Forest and continues on with this title. The Will of the Wisps is still a Metroidvania title just like the Blind Forest, with a lot of areas to unlock for hidden bonuses such as increased health, energy, abilities, and experience points. You can take on combat and speed challenges for additional upgrades as well, but the developers did mix up the gameplay for the better. The biggest change comes to Ori. The spirit is still nimble and gains new movement abilities as the game progresses, such as dashing, grappling, launching, and more, but now Ori can fight and doesn't need a spirit to attack like in the Blind Forest. Starting off with a torch, Ori is able to take the direct approach to enemies and eventually graduate to a sword, bow, and much more. You're given plenty of weapons, and some of which serve in platforming and puzzle solving. Moon Studios have provided more options to the player with plenty of abilities to slot into Ori's ability tree and increase certain abilities, such as increased damage, triple jump, grappling enemies, and much more. Most of these can be upgraded using experience points, some purchased directly from vendors, and others unlocked by locating spirit trees and completing side missions. New to Will of the Wisps are side missions. Most of these are just basic fetch quests, but they do provide additional experience. You can also help the natives rebuild their home in the hub area that opens new items to purchase, such as maps to locate all the hidden secrets in the environment. With plenty of enemies, Ori can take on some breathtaking bosses, which take full advantage of Ori's mobility and offensive tactics. But the bow is pretty overpowered to the point that it breaks the game's difficulty, especially when equipped with heavy offensive abilities. The map is large and mostly easy to navigate. There's plenty of variety with a forest starting area, snowy hills, and much more. Each area has unique platforming challenges that often take advantage of a specific skill, such as the desert making heavy use of Ori's burrowing ability. You're often encouraged to go off the beaten path for optional upgrades, and the game does an adequate job of marking locked areas that you can't access at the moment. However, what the game doesn't properly convey is what you need to do in the final third of the game for story progression. During the final third, you have to collect specific items and they are marked on your map. During my first playthrough, I thought you could gather these items in any order, but that's wrong. Instead, you have to collect them in a specific order, with each area locked behind an obstacle that can only be overcome by an item obtained in the previous area. There's one unlockable item that you must purchase to progress in the story, but the game does not convey this at all. For those worried or excited that the Will-O-the-Wisp would feature the same intense difficulty as the Blind Forest, to a degree it does. From my point of view, the game was slightly easier than the Blind Forest, with a much more forgiving checkpoint system with an autosave feature and easier platforming challenges. That being said, it's still a difficult game, especially in the final area. You're going to die a lot in your first playthrough, but that rush of success when everything just clicks is immensely satisfying. Unfortunately, one of the Will-O-the-Wisp's biggest issues is the frame rate. I was playing this on the Xbox One X, and the game would often drop in frame rate at random times so significantly the game would appear frozen. In a game where precise timing is everything, get ready for some frustrating cheap deaths until it's fixed. I lost out on the Immortal achievement, which requires you to beat the game without dying because the final boss decided to turn invisible and the frame rate dropped. Tell me that wouldn't make you rage. Oh yeah, and speaking of achievements, they're glitched as well. I don't know why Microsoft published games keep releasing with this issue, but the achievements don't work in this game. Well, not all of them, especially the beat the game achievements. So if you're an achievement hunter like myself, prepare for issues that will make you incredibly frustrated when it comes to that regard. Just looking at it, Ori and the Will-O-the-Wisp is a perfect score in both visuals and sound design. The graphics from the Blind Forest were already phenomenal and still hold up today, but somehow Moon Studios were able to improve on those with 3D models, intricate environments layered with particle effects and incredible lighting. Often I was floored and constantly took screenshots to decide what I should make my new wallpaper while playing this game. The soundtrack brings everything together, whether it's watching a cutscene, searching for items, or doing an intense chase sequence. Moon Studios outdid themselves with the musical score. When everything comes together in Will-O-the-Wisp, that's where it truly shines, such as during an intense chase around a beautiful environment that death rushes closer and you have to pull together a chain of jumps and activate specific abilities just to reach the next section while the soundtrack keeps you excited. It's truly amazing. Ori and the Will-O-the-Wisp is an amazing game, and someone who loves platformers, this title truly tested my skills throughout the 8-hour adventure. 14 if you want to get everything and complete all the side missions. The narrative and musical score were absolutely brilliant, and the visuals were dazzling. But the myriad of technical problems dramatically hindered my enjoyment of this wonderful adventure, and since I'm reviewing the game in the state it is now, I have to give it the score that reflects my experience with this title. It's still a truly amazing game and I would recommend it to anyone. And releasing the game with frame rate issues as severe as this, not to mention the achievement problems, and there were several other issues I didn't even discuss in my technical problems section of this review. Sound effects would disappear, enemies would go invisible, well I touched on that with the final boss, but there are so many problems that kept going wrong, and I really wanted to give this game a higher score than I am now, but I have to give it a lower score. Either way, I really hope the technical problems are resolved as quickly as possible, but for now, they're too severe and too frequent to turn a blind eye to.